If, like me, you consider the 911 the sports car icon, then it's undoubted that the Golf GTI is the father and icon of all hatchbacks. Last time on RBR, I showed you the full history of the Golf as we focused on its top level performance model, which is of course the Golf R. But today is all about the one that has the true history and heritage and some of the best back models of any hot hatch. And that is of course Golf's GTI, a car that's always surprised us as to how capable and fun and exciting it can be, how little details can make a small car look exciting. Today we have the top level of the GTI in the new Mark 8 generation, which is the GTI Clubsport. I'm going to show you all of the history of the GTI from the Mark 1 all the way to the new Mark 8. We'll also drive and sit in some of the previous GTIs, and I'll show you how the interiors have changed as well, and then we'll head out in this new Clubsport and show you what it can do. So let's start now and check out the brand new GTI Clubsport Mark 8. This is probably no longer a surprise, but today's episode is sponsored by the company who loves your balls, Manscaped. Your jingle balls will thank you. Yes, they wanted me to say that. Guys, today's episode is sponsored by Manscaped and their new Performance 4.0 package. It's a complete male grooming package, and I'm going to show you everything right now. So guys, here is the Performance Package 4.0 with the brilliantly named lawnmower for all your manscaping needs. It's got an LED so you can be safe down there. It's got skin safe technology as well. You can use it in the shower because it's waterproof. We've also got ball toner, we've got ball deodorant, we've got the free gifts of anti-chafing underwear and the travel bag. And there is something known as the weed whacker that they've also created here, which is a nose and ear trimmer. Again, same idea, all your male grooming needs. And here's a new product for you. Manscaped have even started a cologne for men. Here it is, it's called Refined. Again, all of your male grooming needs covered by Manscaped. So there you go guys, that's the Performance Package 4.0 from Manscaped, including the brand new cologne and the weed whacker. Go to manscaped.com, use the code RBR, you'll get 20% off, plus the 2 free gifts I mentioned. Guys, please support our sponsors, and a huge thanks to Manscaped. The original Golf had the unenviable job of following on from a massive sales success that was the Beetle, but to be honest, the Mark 1 Golf made it look easy with its timeless looks, a better engine layout, and fun and practicality that was unheard of in a small compact car back then. So it's unsurprising that some within VW wanted to see a sportier version. And this idea of the sport Golf was actually envisioned by the head of press at the time, who was Anton Konrad, and another engineer called Alfons Lowenberg. These two formed a small 8-person team and came up with this skunkworks project that they were then calling the Sport Golf. And they were afraid to show their higher-ups because of the failure that the Sport Beetle was prior to this. But in the end, they made such a compelling car and showed their bosses that it was signed off in a matter of months. And so the Grand Tourer injection, or GTI name, was finally born. Now, both Anton and Alfons were like many of us. They loved motorsport, they loved racing, and they did that in their spare time. So they wanted to create a car that was able to keep up with Porsches on the autobahn. And to do that, it had to look slightly different from your normal Golf. So they added certain design elements onto the car to make the GTI instantly recognizable. The main one that everybody cites is, of course, the red detail around the grille, which says, "Get out of the way, I am not a normal Golf, I'm a GTI." We've also got the black details around our arches. We've got different alloys. The inside had further changes to make the GTI a little bit special. For example, the now iconic golf ball and the famous tartan print that survives even today, which was brought on by the interior designer who was the sole woman on the team, called Gunhild, as she was inspired by Scottish fashion that she saw in Carnaby Street here in the UK. So that is something that survives even till today and is so iconic and linked so well to the idea of the GTI. Now, this was a car that back then produced 108 brake horsepower. It could go up to 180 kilometers per hour, and a 0 to 60 of around 9 seconds meant that this was a car to take quite seriously. So when VW bosses signed the GTI off, they expected it to sell something like 5,000 units, which would hopefully recoup their costs with a bit of profit. They're only a little bit off because it ended up selling almost 500,000 units. So was born the father of all hot hatches. Now Mark II had a bit of a rocky start because this was around about the time that the catalytic converter was introduced, and this was throttling power, and because of that the Mark II was about the same speed and power as our Mark I initially. But in 1986, VW brought in a new 4-cylinder engine with 16 valves that brought the power back up. They also added ABS. Now I drove this car, and I tell you, it is one of the coolest, most fun classic cars I've ever driven. Mark I, a little bit rough around the edges, but Mark II has still some modern creature comforts, as I'll show you later in the video. The gearbox was that much better than the Mark I. A fantastically smooth engine, those MK1 type looks, the BBS alloys and all the design cues that make a classic GTI iconic. It's still such a cool car, and as I said, wait till later, I'll show you some of the cool bits in the Mark II interior. Then you had Mark III, which continued the tradition. You still got some red details on the black parts of the car, not as iconic as Mark II, I think, and you start to see that rounding off start to happen that came in these generations. But the power went up to 150 brake horsepower, 0 to 60 dipped finally under 9 seconds, which was impressive. We had the first diesel version, which we would later known then as the GTD, so a pretty significant generation. What came after this though was a bit of a sad story in the 4th generation, where your GTI reduced itself to a mere trim level like AMG line or S line or BMW M line, which was such a sad thing. So you could get this GTI spec on basically any engine variants in the Golf range. And even with the GTI trim, there were no red details to be found on the car. But essentially this entire generation, we can skip and go to our savior, which was the Mark V. Now this is another car that I want to show you some more interesting details on. Let's first start with the design. Returns the classic red grille, the red GTI badges, black side sill, a choice of BBS alloys, or the 18 inches that we have here. You get the tartan prints once again in the interior, though oddly our press car weirdly had the leather seats with the GTI embossed within it. Still looks nice, but not quite as classic as the tartan that you would normally get. Now this generation produced 197 brake horsepower, either from your 6-speed manual with a 0 to 60 of 7.2 or the automatic with the DSG box and a 0 to 60 of 6.9, so pretty impressive. Now Mark VI, although it doesn't look like it, is a heavily re-engineered facelift of the Mark V. Hence it didn't really last that long either, only about 4 years. But despite that, brought across some good improvements like more power. We had an electronic slippy diff for the first time. We had a sound generator used for the first time to amplify sound. You got that dual exit exhaust system on the rear that carries forward to our cars today as well, and the first ever convertible. After this came what I think is probably the best one of the modern era, and that is the Mark VII, based on the MQB platform, already shedding 42 kg off the previous car, which is damn impressive. This car just looks and drives fantastically. Now, our Mark VII came from the get-go with a standard GTI and a performance version, producing up to 230 PS. In terms of the styling, again, it was a very traditional GTI. You had the use of the red line, but this time, for the first time ever, the red came from the grille into our front headlights, which look really, really good as well. Our rear has your typical twin pipe exhaust system. You've got the red GTI badges. The interior, very traditional GTI with the tartan print and other details that I'll show you later in the video. But that wasn't the end, because an absolute bonkers car came after this, and that was the Clubsport S, which had no rear seats, 300 brake horsepower, and manual only. And not only that, they managed to smash the Nürburgring record for front wheel driven hot hatches as well. So impressive, and it just looks and drives absolutely fantastic. One of the best cars that I've ever driven. I think it looks fantastic, and I'm glad that it brings some styling cues into our new car today, and that is the Mark 8, which is quite a shift in design, as we said when we were looking at the Golf R, particularly in the front end. It comes much further down in terms of the entire front styling, more like a sports car, I guess. But this is more over exaggerated when you look at our Clubsport versus the normal GTI. But I love the look of the front end, how it kind of mimics that. The previous Clubsport S, you've still got the typical GTI traits in terms of the red detailing, which go from the grille into the lights, the red GTI badge. I love the massive honeycomb grille of the front. I mean, it looks so intimidating. The wheels are lovely, the brake calipers are finished in red, you've got your red GTI badges as well. The rear looks quite fantastic with that enlarged rear spoiler, which looks really, really good. Something that you only get, for example, in the performance version of the Golf R. And then your larger rear pipes at the bottom as well. Not only is it a car that you wouldn't mistake for a normal Golf, in my estimation, I think it actually looks quite a bit meaner than the Golf R as well. First of all, we've got an aluminium subframe on the front that's actually shared with that ring record breaking car. So that is already 3 kg lighter. We also have stiffer bushings. We have changed springs and helper springs on our front and on our rear. We have adaptive dampers, which can be optioned and absolutely must be in this car. And something quite interesting called a vehicle dynamics manager, which takes control of the steering, the diff, and the adaptive dampeners, if you have it, to control the car as you drive and provide the right settings for each of those areas while you're driving. The car uses the 4th generation of the EA888 engine. First of all, it almost hits 300 brake horsepower, but it is DSG only, but with a 0 to 60 of 5.6 seconds. So immediately a huge bump of power and indeed an increase of torque in the right area that, as you'll see later, makes this feel like quite a significantly different car. Now, of course, there's further changes than just power. We've got more positive camber on this car. We've got a running gear drop of 15 millimeters. We've got new springs and dampers on the rear, and we've also got a fruitier exhaust system. And the vehicle dynamics manager is, of course, tuned up to be that much more dynamic in this Clubsport versus the standard GTI. And indeed, we also get that special Nürburgring mode, if you option it, which we saw in the Golf R as well. This is a positional change now for the Clubsport brand. Rather than being some kind of run-off anniversary model, it's now like the performance version of the GTI that's come very, very early in the life of the Mark 8. And in terms of design, I think it pays a nice homage to the past. Inside, not quite the same story though. Let's go in and take a look. Let's take a look at some of the past cars and why I think the inside is the only bit that's going to leave most of you disappointed. Right, now, I think this particular interior deserves a little bit of critique. I didn't really like it in the Golf R, and I like it probably even less in the GTI, considering how cool the interiors were in the previous GTIs. Let me first of all start with this idea of structure, because the structure of this car is totally alien compared to the previous GTIs. And to show you just how alien, I want to start with my favourite, which was the Mark II. So guys, we've got quite a few classic GTIs to look at here. We're starting in the Mark II. I just want to show you first something in the Mark I that we had earlier. You can see the structure of the interior, and then when you come to the Mark II, very, very similar as well. And this theme carries through. Check out the Mark V as well, down to the Mark VII, which is the last time you see that shape of interior until we reach our Mark 8. Which is totally different to the rest. Now, when you come back to the original GTIs, I mean, this is a really lovely car. We were actually trying to get some more light in the car earlier, and yeah, that's how I used to do it back in the days. Luckily, we actually have electric windows in this, which we didn't have in the Mark I, and we've got power steering, and the gearbox actually works properly. Brakes aren't as sharp as you'd like them to be. Trees come a lot quicker than you'd expect. But otherwise, this was actually a really fun car to drive. I like the interior. I like how minimalistic yet sharp it is. The gear lever here looks like a golf ball, which is interesting. GTI theme of interesting fabric seats continues throughout, as you'll see later. Steering wheel doesn't have the GTI badge on it anymore like Mark I did, as you saw there, which I actually quite liked because it gave it a bit of a unique look. This has just got the VW logo in it, as you find on the speaker grills as well. But it's a really, really nice interior. This survives well today, only if it had like air conditioning or something, because it was quite hot sitting in this car trying to drive it. But pulling the windows down and having some fun in an old classic like this, you just can't beat it. Now, how awesome were the little details in the Mark II? And to be fair, that structure and those details have carried forward into almost every GTI generation leading up to this one, which just abandoned it all. It's totally bloody different in every single way. I think it's a lot more Audi than it is VW in my opinion. And the first thing I'd cite on that is this long, well, half of it is fake, which again is very Audi. vent over here, which is, if I showed you the RS4 one and then showed you this one, did you know which one was which? Bet you didn't, because they look so bloody similar. Same with this trim strip here. And just the structure, it just does not feel Golf to me at all. You've got the strange gear selector here. That's more Porsche than it is Golf. And again, I didn't like it in the 911. I don't like it in the Golf either. They would have been much better served, even with the DSG version, to have a stick like they've had historically in every DSG with the little golf ball pattern on top, because that would link so nicely to their heritage, which again, this does not. They have a pulsating engine start-stop button, however, which is one thing I do like about it. I think that's pretty cool. When you turn it on, another thing I like is the unique digital display specifically made for GTI, which has got that honeycomb effect that's a little bit golf ball-like as well, so that's nice as well. And then that brings me on to the infotainment system and the steering wheel controls, that either you're going to love or you're going to absolutely hate, and it's going to be a deal breaker, because there's hardly any buttons on this center console. You've got a few things to do with the gear selector, let's ignore those. 4 buttons here, which don't do much, and then some climate control ones here. Everything else is hidden within this system, and it's not particularly safe to use while driving, like most touchscreens. There's no control knob here that you can use it without operating the touchscreen. It's all swipey, it's all touchy, and your vehicle settings, thus, they're all hidden within here. Even heated seat, I need to double press it. I need to go to the heated seat button on the side here, then go to another heated seat button here. If I want to turn it off, I have to keep pressing it like an absolute idiot over here. I don't find any of this safe. I don't think that this is right. You need more buttons for simple things in vehicles. You can't be doing all this while you're driving, particularly a quite sporty car. In terms of the UI, it matches the ambient lighting, which is actually quite cool. So I've chosen red for the GTI because it makes sense, but you can change the entire UI to blue or yellow or whatever you want to do. But it does actually change literally every button and everything to that color, so it can be a little bit overpowering. There is a mode button here, which takes us then into our drive select area, and you can see eco, comfort, sport, and then the special one, which has got the Nürburgring symbol on, as I said, within our GTI Clubsport. That dials everything up to literally 15, as you'll see here in our individual section. You've got 15 different levels to the GTI, depending on the road you're driving on. It sounds slightly overkill to me, but I've heard in practice that it actually works pretty well, and we'll see that later on the drive as well. I do like the driver zone. I like the fact that you get loads of different views. I like the fact that you can customize what you see on there as well. All of that is a win for me, and I do like the GTI details, including on the steering wheel. I do like the steering wheel. I think it's a nice steering wheel. But then the steering wheel fails as well, because it's got these ridiculous touch buttons on here that you will keep pressing, I promise you, while you're driving, because it just happens, because they're very sensitive and they're right there, and you'll keep pressing them. Sadly, GTI hasn't got a nice GTI logo button here for the mode like the Golf R had the R button. I think that would have been a nice touch, because I really do think that the GTI is their halo car. And in terms of that Club Sport styling, it's all about the honeycomb pattern, as we saw in the previous Club Sport S as well, carried forward into this. So no tartan in this car. You'll find that in the normal GTI. Here, you've got the honeycomb pattern, both on the trims, in our system, on the seats as well. The seats are really quite nice. They're really comfortable. There's good space in the rear. There's good space in the boot. In terms of that, it's actually a very practical and a good car. What I can't personally get over is the entire user experience of it. So that's the interior. I'm a much bigger fan personally of the last generation, the Mark 7, which stayed true to all the previous Golfs. I think they've lost their way here. If you don't mind touchscreens, you might be okay with it. If you don't mind touch operation on the steering wheel, you might be okay as well. It's not something that I personally could live with. Anyway, GTI Club Sport is all about the drive. This is the performance version of the most famous hot hatch in the world. Let's see how it does out on the road. So guys, when you drive a Golf Mark 8, there is one thing that will infuriate you from the get-go if you're like me. And I hate being negative, more of a glass half full type guy, as you know, but this is genuinely shit. And what that is, it's the lane keeping assist that is on by default, even if you turn it off. It never saves your settings. It never learns the fact that you don't want it on. To actually turn it off, you have to click on some stupid lane diagram, which took me ages to figure out. And you have to do that every time you drive. Because otherwise, if you don't, a slight turn into a lane and the steering wheel jogs you this way and reminds you, shit, I didn't turn that silly option off. It should just save it, surely. Anyway, that's the first bit. The second bit, again, it's not good news. We always start with the launch control at RBR. Let's do that now, because this is a GTI Clubsport. It's something that you would compare against the Golf R, which did a cracking 4.1 second, I think we did on launch. Now, another thing that's just like this is trying to turn electronic stability control off. And it's a total nightmare. You shouldn't do it while driving, which I'm going to stop. It took me ages, as I said to you guys, to find it last time. Let's see if I can remember this time. It was in brakes or something silly like that, wasn't it? Let's go in here. Brakes, ESC off, confirm. Right, now we can try launch control. Let's try it out and see what this does. So that simply could not get any traction off the line at all. 6.4 seconds, and about 3 seconds of that being wheel spin. All right, let's try that again. Nope, nope. It just can't put down the power at all. All right, guys, I'm going to give it the third and last try now. Let's see if we can't get this to work and pick up some traction. Nope, second gear as well. 7.3 seconds this time. So launch control is not liking either the tyres or the fact that it's a little bit damp outside today. Why is my arse on fire? Oh, I've accidentally engaged the seat heating. And that happens so many times in this car. And it's so easy to do. It's so annoying, and I have to turn it off. And I have to tap on here 3 times while driving. It's just, this is not a good system. It's not a safe system, and it's just not user-friendly. Now guys, the Golf R, as I said, achieved a time of 4.1 seconds, which is kind of pushing to the upper echelon of things like A45S, etc. In fact, quicker than my BMW M2 CS was as well. Whereas this car, even a light rolling start, traction light control is blaring there. And it just can't seem to put down the power. I think a lot of it might be the Goodyear tyres that are fitted on these cars. Let's try again. Wheel spin, wheel spin, wheel spin. Oh dear. And this then I've found is a problem that compounds pretty much in every bit of the dynamic driving of this GTI Clubsport. Now to do some of that dynamic driving, let's actually put the car into our special Nürburgring mode, which is the most dynamic of the lot, and see how it fares. Again, can't get the traction quite down, but one thing this car is undoubtedly is bloody quick. Very reminiscent of the Golf R in that sense. It can really put down speed once it's got power to the ground. And I think actually the steering feel, particularly in this Nürburgring mode, or the special mode rather, is very, very good. It's very nicely weighted, big difference compared to the comfort steering, which I'll get onto later, and you have a good idea of what the front end is doing. But if you start to push on a bit too fast, that front end, it begins to find its limits pretty quickly, and then when you're trying to power out of a corner, again, traction control light, it just cannot get the grip, and that doesn't give you confidence as a driver. And this is a problem twofold, because A, you don't want to go into a corner too fast because you know the front end will find its limits and it's not going to have the playability of the R, which we'll get onto in a minute. And then secondly, when you're coming out of that corner, you're aware that the car isn't going to have the ability to put down that traction. I mean, it's a horrible feeling when a front wheel drive car can't get traction, the sound it makes and the feeling it gives you as a driver. And the other feeling that's horrible is when the seat heating of the bloody steering wheel turns on because it's right on this stupid touch button thing, which is right near where you hold the spoke. Really, it's not until you get into third gear, even then, as you just saw there, still having issues. And look, it's a little bit damp out here today. The sun is out, the road is drying, still not getting the traction. You compare that to the allegedly heavier, allegedly less purist Golf R. That car, with its 4-motion all-wheel drive rear bias system, is a totally different animal when attacking a corner, because you can go in as fast as you want without the fear of understeer, because you know that most of the power is then going to go to the rear, and when you exit the corner you get power on the rear and assistance from the front to get you out super fast. And what that does is it gives you confidence and makes you drive faster and faster, and the car is frankly just that much quicker. When I drove that, I said it was like a compact sports car, and it really was. And that's what the GTI was historically always called. It was the little compact sports car. And it's a shame that this GTI Clubsport, for me, it just does not work, particularly when the R is only a measly £2,000 more. Then I think we should switch the mode to, not eco, comfort. And in comfort, it's a very different car. It's more of a Golf. The first thing that you notice so much is how much lighter the steering becomes. I've never seen steering that has this much difference between the comfort mode and the sporty ones. Usually either steering is sporty or it isn't, and in between the modes, not that much difference. But with the GTI, it becomes a lot heavier in the sportier modes, which is what you want, and very light, in fact, in our comfort mode, which is, it's nice for daily cruising. Now this car has the adaptive suspension that I mentioned is a must on almost all the MK8s, okay? It's got the DCC. As you can see here in these awful UK roads of ours, it doesn't like uneven road surfaces. You bump around a lot in this vehicle, particularly in and around town where we have kind of our worst roads. It's okay on the smoother surfaces, but you're very much aware that this is one of the sportiest Golfs that you can buy. They haven't hidden that fact. Of course, there's 15 different options, as I said, on the damper settings, etc., but you're very much aware that this is a sportier version, and it lacks that comfort that you liken most, I think, to the Golf experience. It's such a shame, because I'd like to try this car with a different set of tyres to see if we can get better traction, because that really ruins the whole experience. Despite the fact that we've got a really good electronically controlled diff on the front, it doesn't really seem to be doing anything for us, and that's a shame when they've gone to such lengths on the underpinnings of the Clubsport to make it better. Things like that let the car down. The general infotainment system, I mean, the lane assist is back on because I happened to change camera position outside for 2 seconds, and now I have to go back inside there and turn it off again via the touchscreen. It's just not great. Whereas all of this stuff that I don't like in the GTI, I would happily ignore in the Golf R, because it's such a good car to drive. It's so dynamic and it's so fast. Whether it's attacking a corner, going fast in a straight line, getting all-weather use out of it, or doing a launch control, the R is the one for me. If you've got your heart set on a GTI, I think just go for the standard one. The Clubsport isn't doing it any favours with that extra horsepower bump, because it simply can't put down the power. So guys, I hope you enjoyed looking at the full history of the GTI. I really enjoyed doing that. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like, and most of all, subscribe to RBR. And I'll see you guys next time, after I turn the bloody heated steering wheel off again.